Okay, so let's mesh this guy together. So when I was blocking in the bones, I was kind of just trying to think about what is the most important thing at any given stage. And as I work with the muscles, I'm going through this internal checklist, right? And just using that to think about the functionality of the body. Now, as I hang on. Okay. As I move towards working with the skin, I really want to think about, there is a stage where I have to think about not making a thing anatomical, and kind of like going the opposite route. So by that I mean, like, there is a real danger when you start working with anatomy that there's a temptation to make everything anatomical, because you've battled hard for that information, for that knowledge, and you've earned it. So, like, you know, you've learned about the teres minor, so then you put it in because it took you time to learn it. And for me, when I'm hitting this stage, I'm going, okay, now it's all about courage. It's about courage to just go, let's not think about anatomy. Let's not think about allowing those smaller forms to read, or let's not think about anything other than the dominant story, something like that. So as I'm working with these forms, all I want to be thinking about is, from a storytelling point of view, what makes sense. I don't need any of the forms to read, especially strongly, so unless they're relevant to the story. So here, just digging down, finding the bone again, right? So here, this is the spine of the scapula. That's a bony landmark. This guy is going to be fairly athletic, so that bony landmark is going to be a depression. This is the inner border of the scapula. This is the line of my serratus muscle. Through here, this is the line of the rib cage. So then, as I'm dealing with the pecs, just like in my head, I'm just going, okay, what are the things that I want to look for? And, you know, as we spoke about in the mass conception, it's flat on the top, and then we have the sharp curve underneath. By the way, one thing that I was thinking about, do I put it in that muscle checklist or not? And in the end, I didn't, but I'm not sure if that was the right decision or not, is this idea of when you see a pattern, where else does that pattern manifest itself in the body? So, for example, here we have the pecs flat on top, sharp curve underneath. We see that pattern repeating pretty much at any time when we have a large loose mass that fights against gravity. So certainly in the male, you'll see it in the bum cheeks, where it's like at the top it's a flat plane because gravity is pushing down on that, and then you have a sharp curve underneath. The female breasts, you see the same thing, right? Flat plane on top, sharp curve underneath. The longer those breasts have been having the fight against gravity, the longer that vertical plane is going to be, and the sharper the curve is going to be underneath that. You'd see it on the calf muscles. You see it on a belly that sticks out. You see it in a whole bunch of places. So maybe something that you could append to that. When you see a pattern, where else will that pattern be? Because if you were designing a form and you come up with some visual motif or something like that, in order to unify the concept, to have unity of idea, you would probably want to repeat that form somewhere else. And like an example of where we might see that is if I spin around to the back through here, and we see something like these vertical columns through here of the lumbar muscles, right? And then I can come up here and actually see two vertical columns from the trapezius as well. So here, that form is mirrored, right? And that mirroring kind of unifies that with that. And what's mad is that, like, I can take this further and go, well, the skin is glued to the body down here. So oftentimes, especially in older people, or when the body is, when someone's leaning back, something like that, you see like these wrinkles under tension. Right? The skin generally isn't glued to the body in many places, but it is down there, and it is up there as well. So that concept is kind of repeated through there. Through here, just making sure that I have that plane break in the back, and then going rhomboids. So working with my deep muscles first. I noticed recently that on a lot of people, the abs flare out in the middle. So you end up with a shape like this. So I've always kind of taught it as a bullet shape, but there is some nuance to it where it's like, where it can get wider in the middle. And I noticed that because I'm looking at it and going, Jesus, how do I avoid parallel lines when I'm dealing with the abs? And that's one thing, you know, and these answers will start to present themselves to you if you're asking the questions. So there, top angle coming down more, second one being horizontal, third one being something like that. And of course, like in life, this can be massively asymmetrical, and you sometimes see those bands being like an inch higher or lower than each other. I'm not going to break the symmetry here because it's just going to be a massive time drain, but just looking to see how I can differentiate each of those bundles from the other one. And then through here, to find the fingers of the serratus. So the personality of the serratus is that those fingers are pretty rounded, right? And the personality of the obliques is that they're not. So there, well, you see, like as soon as I'm looking for that, I'm in dangerous territory here because the obliques have a repeating pattern, right? And as soon as you grab hold of that and you start to look for it, you're starting to battle against something that is intrinsically unnatural. So here, what I want to do is find the variety between each one of those. And what I would probably do to do that is find like the actual movement of the bone underneath the obliques. And in this way, you can quite quickly start to make something feel fairly sophisticated and like it has, you know, layers to it, even though the marks that you're making are really very simple. So this whole time, like any anatomical form that I'm interested in or attached to, I let it go if it's damaging the read of the overall body, right? Like if I have studied the pecs and I'm aware that we have all of these triangles through here, for example, boom, when I start to find each one of those, well, this is going to give me something that's instantly unnatural. So like once you've studied it, if you have the courage to lose it, much better. I noticed something on the pecs that took me a while to figure out, but it's another way that you can break the pattern. There's often a little depression through there. And it's quite a nice thing to find to instantly give an unexpected detail, let's say, a naturalistic detail. Yeah, it took me a while to guess that. Any ideas why we have a depression there?
The edge of the ribcage.
Yeah, the pecs are glued to the rib cage up until this point, and then they're diverging away from it, right? Like these wings leaving the body. So there, oftentimes, you won't see it, I don't think, in massive pecs, but you'll see it in, and in really skinny people, you'll see the bone here as a more prominent thing, but in like what medium-sized pecs, like mine, I can see it. It's a fairly common thing that you'll see, so. And then through here, this is bony landmark. Bony landmark being any area that will never be covered by muscle. So the bigger the pecs get, just the more of a depression that's going to be through there. And then, so we said with the pecs, we have this, our pattern is the spiraling triangle, but that first one is the most dominant one. So that's one way that we can look to break it if we want. Deltoid pushes forwards and is fairly flat on the back. Again, like if you get excited about separating each one of these heads of the deltoid, because you have an anterior, you have a medial, you have a posterior one, you're probably going to end up in trouble pretty fast. One nuance of the deltoid, I would say, like in our checklist, we're saying, where does the muscle turn to tendon? If you look in an anatomy book, you'll see the muscle is going to there. But actually, it's turning to tendon through there. So the more muscular you are, the more obvious that transition is going to be. So something like that. Okay, now let's start to work the back, because this is an area that can kill you, but as soon as you start building up form through layers of detail, you can start to get results that work well pretty fast. So through here, I'm looking at my rhomboids. So working my deepest masses first, or working my bone first, right? And then the deepest masses. We've got the rhomboids there, then the serratus. If we want him to be developed, that, like developed from a muscular point of view, that bulge there, right? That widening of the rib cage, that's coming from the serratus. Yes, lats, but mostly serratus. Now through here, we can start to talk about the trapezius. And the trapezius is like the lats. It's an area that's going to throw people off a lot. So what I would look for is, well, firstly, where does it turn to tendon? This is a really significant area. This is a fairly significant area. And then down here, it's a little bit significant, but here's the thing that is going to trip people up, is like the trapezius is thickest through there, probably a little bit higher than that. That's where it's thick. Here it's thin, here it's thin. So just don't find it all the way down. Right? I mean, yeah, sometimes you can, and sometimes you'll read it all the way down, but if you have it of like equal intensity all the way down, then it's unlikely to work out for you. The one thing that I really like to find on the trapezius is something like this. So there's the spine of my scapula, right? And then that's the trapezius through there. And if we're looking at it anatomically, carries on down to there, right? So you can go 1, 2, 3 lines. But because it's thin down there, you're unlikely to see it like that. So here is a thing that will generally work pretty well if you want a naturalistic feel to it, is you can go there, and then bounce back up and feed that into the line of the rhomboids. So here, like if you work with it this way, and you will, once you start looking for it, you'll see this in life all the time, right? And so of course you have to break that line, because lines have to be broken in nature. But if you work with it like this, you're kind of describing bone through there, then you're describing the muscle of the trapezius, then you're describing the muscle of the rhomboids. So you're creating complexity through the layering of form and through the understanding of what those different forms are. That might not work for you, but it's thinking about things in this way and seeing what works for you. And another way that you could add nuance to this would be to go, well, the trapezius is actually covering the scapula a little bit. So the border of the scapula is going to be something like that. So that would give you, so here we have that as a prominence, that's the border of the scapula, and then we have this, and then we feed into the rhomboids. So just like in finding ways to think about this, we can start to insert more complexity into our work. Down here is another interesting area. Like I would look for the scapula at the bottom through here. So here, this is bony landmarks. We find that as strongly as we can. Through here, it's not, because it's covered by the trapezius. But then down there is again. So that's an interesting, like, I like to find that to give, it's like when you're dealing with soft forms and things like that, you know how it's always nice to find that little bit of sharpness. I relate it to like lemon juice in cooking, right? If you use it all over the place, it's not going to taste so good, but sometimes a little bit of it brings out the flavors. So I'm always looking for like, where can I find those little bits of sharpness? That's one interesting area, because it's an area that isn't covered by muscle that much. Like if you have people like operating on your lungs or your heart from your back, that's where they'll go in, because there's the least amount of muscle they need to go through. Or if they need to listen to the beating of your heart through there, it's through your back, it's through there. And so then as we go into these forms through here, teres major, I'm just going, yeah, that's round, that's sausagey, and then infraspinatus, flat by comparison. And that's all I'm worried about through there. So then latissimus, like this is where you can get into trouble, right? If you go, okay, that's going to be latissimus all the way along there, and then maybe even you find that it turns to tendon through there, but it's so thin that as soon as I find that, I suddenly go into a world that's unnatural and unbelievable. So what I would think about with latissimus is, yes, it does manifest itself on the form in some people, and it has a sausagey band down there. And so like you can just find that, and that will give you like, pretty much all you need. I'm going to take a step back to readjust this guy's proportions. He's getting a bit weird. Okay, through here, if you want to, just find some vertebrae. Really, like again, like if you're working through layers of complexity, then each thing that you hit can be a fairly fairly simple thing. Through here, maybe you find some ribs, something like that. I mean, one thing that I like to do when I'm working anatomically is to just like I guess fake stuff. By that I mean like the serratus posterior muscles I mentioned before are like these cat whiskers that you'll see there. Now the thing is like if you've worked hard for that knowledge, maybe you want to grab hold of it and just make it really obvious. But and sometimes it will be, but oftentimes a better way of working it is just to have it and then just kiss it goodbye until it's like it's nothing more than a whisper, but there's still a little bit of something there. You know, that I would say is a way to avoid the making sculpts feel anatomical, because that's, you know, that's always going to give you problems. As we work the trachea through here, we'll, as always, have some dynamic tension. So in a male, it's going to be something like this, that you have this cartilage at the top, that's your Adam's apple, and then that contrasts against this spherical round bit at the bottom. So the pattern is that the tracheas are a cylinder. The way the pattern breaks is you have a sharp bit of cartilage there, and then a rounded bit down there. I mentioned like we can conceive of the neck as a cylinder that leans forwards. What I would do if you do think of it in that way is then chop it diagonally and just have a triangle at the front and a triangle at the back, and that's going to give you most of what you need. Through here, I just need to make sure that this is a rounded shape. So this muscle through here, sternocleidomastoid muscle, right? Pretty much a hero muscle, something that we're going to see time and time again, wraps around the form, right? It's starting at the front, wraps around to the back. That means it's a turning muscle, amongst other things. Right? Any muscle that wraps around form will turn form, but also because it's attached to the rib cage, when it pulls that point to that point, it's going to pull the rib cage up, so it's involved in breathing. By taking a breath of air, you're going to see that thing pop out quite strongly. Trapezius moving from the back to the front. Very useful, I think, in general, to think about the transition of muscle through areas. So by which I mean forms that move from back to front. So trapezius is starting on the back, moving to the front. Latissimus starts on the back, moves to the front. Obliques start on the front, move to the back. Pectoral start on the front, move to the back. If you hit all of those things, then you're going to have lines that dance throughout the figure. It's a very powerful way of working, I think. Okay, so let's say that like that as a basic block-in, something that we'd be happy to go with. So that takes us to 4 o'clock. It makes sense to take a break. What I want to do after this is then just start to look at moving that guy and seeing what happens, and start to look at what happens if we change up his body type.